$200. That was what she had left after rent, after her student loan payment, after the electricity bill. $200 between her and the end of the month. And she gave it away, not to a charity, not to a cause, but to a waiter she had known for 11 days. A quiet man who carried plates at a Manhattan steakhouse, who ate his staff meal alone at the end of the table, who had never once asked her for a single thing. She gave it because she thought he needed it more than she did. She gave it because that is the kind of woman Diana Cole was. What she could not have known was that the man she had just handed her last $200 to was worth $3.4 billion. And what he could not have known was that this moment, this single act of grace from a woman who could not afford it, was going to be the most important thing that had happened to him in 20 years of building wealth. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. We love hearing from all of you across the United States and beyond. And please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what you are about to hear is not a fairy tale. It is the story of two people, both running experiments they had not told each other about, who found something in a Manhattan restaurant that neither of them had ever been able to find in all the years before. This is the story of Nathan Reed and Diana Cole. And it begins, the way the best stories do, with a single decision made in the dark. Nathan Reed was 47 years old. He was the founder and CEO of Stellarion Capital, a private equity firm headquartered on the 44th floor of a glass building in Midtown Manhattan that managed $3.4 billion in assets. He had built it from nothing, from a spare bedroom in Indianapolis in the late 1990s, from a legal pad and 20-hour days, and a deep, unshakable refusal to accept no as anything more than a temporary position. His father had been a high school football coach. His mother had been a school librarian. He had arrived in New York at 24 with $1,100, a used suit, and a clarity of purpose that people who encountered him either found inspiring or quietly unsettling, depending on how comfortable they were with certainty in a young man who had not yet earned the right to it. He earned it. By the time he was 47, he had the penthouse, the car, the table at every restaurant worth having a table at. A Wall Street Journal profile 3 years ago had called him the quiet billionaire, which was accurate. He did not seek cameras. He gave to causes without press releases. By every external measure, Nathan Reed had everything. The internal measure told a different story. Because Nathan Reed, for all his wealth, could not solve the one problem that money does not touch. He did not know whether a single person in his life would have chosen him if he had been worth nothing. Research consistently shows that people of extreme wealth report profound isolation at significantly higher rates than their peers. Not ordinary loneliness, but the specific inability to trust the motivations of those who choose to be close to you. Howard Schultz, the former Starbucks CEO, described building a company as a lonely place because extreme wealth makes genuine vulnerability almost impossible. Nathan understood that loneliness from the inside. He had been engaged twice. Both times the ending left the same residue, a suspicion that the man those women agreed to marry was the net worth and the profile, not the man with the legal pad on his nightstand. For 6 months, he had been developing a plan his CFO Arthur Voss considered either brilliant or deranged. The plan: Nathan would spend 90 days working as a waiter at a high-end Manhattan restaurant. Not as an observer or an investor conducting due diligence. As an actual waiter, carrying plates, taking orders, wearing the uniform, earning the hourly wage like everyone else on the floor. He would operate under a different name. He would tell no one except Arthur Voss. He would interact with people who had no reason to treat him with any particular consideration, and he would see, stripped of every advantage his name and his net worth provided, what kind of person he actually was when the power was gone. And, more importantly, what kind of people he encountered when he was just a man doing a job. The restaurant he chose was Harlow's, a high-end steakhouse on the west side of Manhattan in which he held a silent minority stake through a shell company Arthur managed. He arranged the placement quietly. He was given a uniform, a section, and a name badge reading Nathan Wells. He started on a Monday in September. He had been there 31 days when he met Diana Cole. Diana Cole was 33 years old, and she had not opened her drafting portfolio in 8 months. It was under her bed in her studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, a large black case holding 4 years of architectural work she was proud of and currently had no use for. She had graduated from the University of Illinois with an architecture degree, moved to Chicago, and landed a position at Meridian Design Group, a firm specializing in adaptive reuse projects, taking old industrial buildings and restoring them without erasing what they had been. She loved the work with the intensity of someone who has found the thing they were made for. She had been there 2 years, building towards something real, when the firm's primary funding collapsed in 2022 and the company folded in 90 days. She moved to New York because that was where the architecture jobs were. She arrived in January with credentials, a portfolio, and 2 years of the exact experience the firms were looking for. What she received was silence. Resume after resume acknowledged and filed in a hiring freeze that showed no signs of lifting. The months accumulated in a way that felt, at first, like a temporary condition and gradually became something harder to name. She took the job at Harlow's in March because the rent did not wait, and because Diana Cole was not a woman who waited for the situation to change without taking the action in front of her. She kept a small notebook in her apron pocket. Not for orders, she memorized those. For observations. The proportions of the room. The light on the bar at 7 in the evening. Old habits from 4 years of learning to see the world as a system of spaces and decisions. She had been there 6 months when Nathan Wells walked in. She noticed the new waiter on his 3rd day. Not because he was remarkable in any obvious way. He was quiet, contained, competent in the slightly stiff way of someone the work was genuinely new to. What she noticed was the notebook he was holding in the corridor between the kitchen and the floor. In a moment, he clearly believed he was unobserved. He was not writing orders. He was sketching precise, structural lines, the kind a person makes when they have spent years being trained to see a room as a system of planes and proportions rather than simply a space to move through. She stopped. She looked at the notebook for a moment. Then she looked at him. She said, "You are not writing orders in there." It was not a question. He looked up. He said, "No." She said, "Me neither." She held up her own notebook briefly, then tucked it back into her apron and walked back onto the floor. That was the entire exchange. But something had shifted in the particular way things shift when two people recognize, in a single moment, that they are both looking at something true that neither of them has to explain. Over the following weeks, what developed between Nathan and Diana was not a romance in the ordinary sense. It was mutual recognition, the particular experience of encountering someone who sees the same things you see, for reasons neither of you has explained to the other. They discovered they had both grown up in the Midwest. They shared a specific, articulate love for the industrial architecture of that region, the old manufacturing buildings, the brick and steel, the horizontal light through factory windows that you do not find in anything built after 1960. Diana had written her undergraduate thesis on the adaptive reuse of 1920s industrial structures in the Chicago metro area. Nathan, over a Tuesday staff meal, mentioned that he had been quietly buying and restoring those exact kinds of buildings for 15 years as a private project he had never publicized. He described it simply as something he did with money that would otherwise sit in an account doing nothing interesting. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "How many buildings?" He said, 11. Working on the 12th. She said, "Where?" He named a neighborhood in Indianapolis. She pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph, a 1924 textile warehouse she had documented on a research trip and used as a case study in her thesis. He looked at the photograph. He said, "I know that building." She said, "Everyone who cares about that period knows it." He said, quietly, "No, I mean I own it." The conversation stopped. Diana put her phone away. She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating everything they thought they understood about the person across the table. Then she said, "On a waiter's salary?" He laughed, a real laugh she had not heard from him before. She laughed too. Neither of them pushed further, because some conversations know their own limit. The broken glass happened on a Friday service in late October. Nathan was carrying a full tray of wine glasses when it caught a server station edge and went down. The crash stopped the dining room. Rick Harmon, the floor manager, was at Nathan's side in seconds. Rick was 53, polished in the way of a man who had spent his career managing appearances over substance, and he had disliked Nathan from the beginning with the instinctive hostility of someone who senses, without being able to explain, that the person in front of them is more than they appear. He said things, loudly enough to be heard at adjacent tables, in the voice of a manager who believed public correction was effective leadership. Nathan stood in the broken glass and said nothing. He looked at Rick with the steady expression of a man who had fired people for exactly this behavior. Diana was the only staff member who came to help. She got a dustpan, returned, got down on the floor beside Nathan, and began picking up glass without a word. Nathan looked at her, and something settled in him that had been unsettled for a very long time. Day 47 was a Tuesday in November. Cold outside. The city making its shift towards something sharper. Staff meal was pasta, the sous chef in a good mood. The floor team easier than usual. Nathan sat at his end of the table. Diana sat beside him deliberately, which he noticed. She asked him how long he had been doing this. He said, "Not long enough to be good at it." She said, "You are better than you think." Then she asked why he took the job. He gave the answer that was true without being complete. He needed to understand how people behave when the context is removed, when there is no title and everyone is just people doing a job. She was quiet. Then she said, "The worst part of this job is being invisible. You ask what someone needs, you bring it, you refill it, and they look straight through you. You start to wonder if you have actually disappeared." She said it without self-pity, which made it more devastating than if she had. Nathan did not answer, because what she had described was exactly what he had spent 47 days deliberately seeking. She had been living it without choosing it, and she was still showing up with her full attention, her notebook in her pocket, her eyes reading the room. After service, Diana found him in the corridor near the coat closet. She held out a plain white envelope. She said, "You look like you could use a better week." He opened it on the sidewalk. 2 $100 bills. He stood in the November cold and looked at the money for a long time. This woman had given him what she could not afford to give, with no calculation about what he could offer in return, because she had looked at him and seen someone who might be struggling and responded to it. He put the $200 in his inside jacket pocket, not his wallet, against his chest, and he walked home 23 blocks because the thinking required movement. By the time he reached his building, he was no longer certain whether he was still running an experiment or whether it had, somewhere in the last 47 days, become his actual life. Rick Harmon found out on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks before Nathan's 90 days were up. A payroll inquiry led him down a chain of LLC records to the name Nathan Reed and a Wall Street Journal profile photograph that confirmed, without ambiguity, that the man carrying wine glasses at Harlow's was one of the wealthiest private equity founders in the country. Rick did not go to Nathan. He went to Diana. He called her into his office before Thursday's service, pulled up the profile on his monitor, and let her read it. He said he thought she should know who she had been spending her time with. He said it in the voice of a man performing concern while performing something else entirely, watching her face for the reaction he had designed the disclosure to produce. Diana read the article. She looked at the photograph. She put the phone down. She said, "Why are you telling me this?" He said he was looking out for her. She said, "No, you are not." She picked up her apron, stood, and walked out. Diana found Nathan in the service corridor 20 minutes before the evening doors opened. She said, without preamble, "I know who you are." He held her gaze. He did not deny it. He said, "I was going to tell you tonight. I was done with the experiment 3 weeks ago. I just had not found the right words." She said, "Were you actually going to tell me, or were you going to let the 90 days run out?" He said, "Tell you. I was going to tell you." She looked at him with the expression of someone taking an accurate measurement. She said, "I gave you $200. He said, "I know." She said, "I thought you needed it." He said, "I did. Not the way you meant. But I did." She said she needed time. She picked up her order book and worked the rest of the service without looking at him. At the end of the night, she was gone before he reached the exit. Diana did not return to Harlow's the next day or the day after. On the third day, she called and formally resigned, citing a personal circumstance, and the manager on duty noted it without drama. Nathan spent those 3 days doing something he had not done since his 20s, waiting without being able to do anything about it. He had Arthur Voss run a quiet check on Diana through publicly available records, not to pursue her, but because he needed to know she was all right. She was in Astoria. She had not gone anywhere. Arthur reported with a slight edge in his voice, appearing to go about her life normally. Nathan thanked him and sat with that information. She was not running. She was not devastated in the way Rick Harmon had intended. She was thinking. Nathan Reed had spent 20 years building a company that required him to read people correctly under pressure. He read Diana Cole correctly. He gave her 3 days. Then he took the subway to Queens. What she told June, 3 days after she walked out of Rick's office, was this. She had known Nathan was not a waiter by day 15. Not with certainty. She did not make firm conclusions from soft information. But she had known with the knowing that comes from years of training yourself to read spaces and people. The way he held himself when no one was watching. The vocabulary he used without thinking. The questions about buildings that were too structural, too informed, to belong to someone with no background in it. And Rick Harmon, who bullied every junior staff member at Harlow's without consequence, had always been slightly careful around Nathan. That carefulness, to a woman who read rooms for a living, was a signal. June asked why she had said nothing if she had known for 60 days. Diana said, because it didn't matter. He was being exactly who he was, without the things he owns. And that person was someone I respected. June said, then why did you leave? Diana said, because Rick told me first. And Nathan needed to understand that there are things you have to do yourself. You cannot let someone else deliver the truth to a person who matters to you. June said, so what are you going to do? Diana picked up her coffee. She said, I am going to let him find me. He is resourceful. And if he does not come, I will have learned something important about the actual man, not the waiter. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he carried those $200 against his chest for 40 days. I know he did, because I watched him put them there that night on the sidewalk, from the window above. A man who does that is not a man who stops when something matters to him. He came on a Thursday morning. Diana heard the knock at 8:45 and knew before she opened the door. Nathan stood in the hallway in his own clothes, his own life, no car outside. He had taken the subway. He held out a plain cream envelope. She said, is this an apology or an explanation? He said, neither. Open it. She opened it. Inside, folded in thirds, was a single sheet of paper, and resting on top of it, 2 $100 bills. She looked at the money, then unfolded the paper. It was a hand-drawn floor plan, precise, architectural, the lines of someone trained to render space. She recognized the building before she could name it. The 1924 textile warehouse from her thesis, the one she had photographed and shown him at a staff meal in October. He had drawn it from memory, with the specific detail of someone who had been inside every room. Under the floor plan, in plain handwriting, I bought this in 2019. I have been waiting for the right person to know what to do with it. Not as an employee, as an architect, working on what it should become, with full say over the vision. No conditions. No obligation. Only if you want it. Only if it is what you would have chosen anyway. Diana read it twice. She looked at the floor plan, the roofline she had written 6,000 words about, the building she had loved from a photograph and never expected to have anything to do with. She looked up at Nathan, who was watching her with the expression of a man who has made himself completely available to the outcome and has no plan if the outcome is not what he is hoping for. She said, you are still not great at waiting tables. He said, I know. She said, come in. He did. Research published over the last decade shows consistently that people of extreme wealth are far more likely to report profound isolation than their peers. Not ordinary loneliness, but the specific inability to trust the motivations of the people around them. The higher the net worth, the research suggests, the more difficult it becomes to form relationships that are not, at some level, shaped by what you represent rather than who you are. Howard Schultz described building his company as a lonely place because wealth makes genuine vulnerability almost impossible. You become a symbol before you can be a person. Nathan Reed built an experiment to address that loneliness directly. He removed everything and walked into a room full of strangers and waited to see what he found. He found Diana Cole, a woman with a portfolio under her bed and a notebook in her apron pocket and $200 she gave away without calculation because she looked at a stranger and saw someone real and responded to that without asking what it would cost her. The building in Indianapolis is currently under restoration. The architectural vision belongs to Diana. The floor plans, the material palette, the decisions about what the building keeps from its original life and what it is allowed to become. The funding belongs to Nathan. The decision to do it at all belongs to both of them equally. Arrived at on a Thursday morning in a studio apartment in Queens over a hand-drawn floor plan and two $100 bills that Nathan Reed had carried against his chest for 40 days. Not in his wallet, against his chest, because they were the most valuable thing anyone had given him in 20 years of building a fortune. Not for what they were worth as currency, for what they said about the woman who gave them, for what it meant that she had looked at a stranger in a restaurant corridor and decided, without hesitation and without any guarantee of return, that he was worth something. The building will be finished in the spring. Diana already knows what she wants to do with the roofline. If this story reached something in you tonight, we want to hear from you in the comments. Tell us, would you be the kind of person who gave that $200? Not after weighing the options, not after calculating whether you could afford it, but in the moment, because someone looked like they were struggling and you had something to give and you gave it anyway. We read every single comment. We are grateful for every person watching with us tonight. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story, someone who has been carrying their own portfolio under their bed, waiting for the right moment, wondering if anyone is actually paying attention, please share this with them tonight. Because the most important thing a person can do, sometimes, is look at someone the world has decided not to see and treat them as though they matter. Diana Cole did that from a place of having almost nothing, and it turned out to be worth everything.